Claire didn't remember exactly how she was pushed into a police car. Through the glass, she saw firefighters carrying out the charred wreckage. As someone's voice on the radio said, 2 children did not survive. Ed was still standing in the same place, as if there was no smoke, no ashes, no terrible silence in which the children's voices could no longer be heard. When Claire tried to approach him, he turned away. He just went into the house as if none of this had anything to do with him. And that's how her fall into the abyss began. Over the next few weeks, she tried to figure out what had happened. She thought it was an accident. The barn might be locked down. Maybe the kids were playing with matches. Everything is understandable. Everything except Ed's behavior. He didn't come to the funeral. He wasn't crying. He didn't talk to the police unless he had to. He would just come home from work, sit in an armchair, and turn on the TV. It was as if these children had never lived with him. It's like they never existed. Claire blamed the shock at first, then myself. Then I started remembering. Those cold stares, those weird conversations where he asked how much child insurance costs. She remembered once finding him with a calculator and some kind of form, which he hurriedly put away in a drawer when she entered. She didn't think much of it then. And now it wasn't just suspicion. It was poison in her blood. When the police started investigating, they protected him at first. She said he was with her that morning. But at night, she'd watch it all over again. He could have left. He could have slipped away. She was no longer sure of anything. In the end, the case still went to court. In 1988, Ed was arrested and charged with arson with intent to murder. The main evidence was the conclusion of the firefighters. They say the fire spread too fast, so they used an accelerator. Then it was considered a reliable argument. Ed remained silent during the trial. He spoke through lawyers. He wasn't looking at Claire. She acted as a witness for the prosecution. Her voice was trembling. She was crying. She felt like she was betraying herself. But she knew that if she didn't say anything, the truth would die along with the children. The jury decided that he was guilty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Claire thought that would be the end of it, but nothing ends simply. The years passed. Science was advancing. Fire investigation methods have changed. What was considered an arsenal of evidence in the 80s became known as junk science in the 2000s. Experts began to dispute the previous conclusions. Graff's lawyers have found support in the Innocence Project. His case was reviewed. Claire was called again. She was shaking. She was afraid that he would come out. I was afraid that her words wouldn't mean anything. The new trial was hell. Old photos, over and over again. Memories twisted and twisted by lawyers. She felt that she was losing not only her children, but also their right to justice. And suddenly, the climax. Ed admitted his guilt. He didn't explain, didn't repent, just said, "I set fire to the barn. I knew they were there." And everything. As if he said, "I forgot to turn off the stove," in the same tone, the same intonation, and then a turn that no one expected. A legal paragraph forgotten in the archives. According to the old Texas law, he was subject to conditional release if his term and good behavior in prison exceeded the sentence. 8 days after confessing to the murder of 2 children, he was released. Outside, into the air, back to normal life. Claire couldn't believe it. No one could. He was free. And he's not just free, he's won. 30 years of pretending, and it took him 8 days to trade the truth for a door-marked exit. Claire broke down. She couldn't look in the mirror because there was a shadow there. She stopped answering her phone. The neighbors turned away. The people in the church stopped saying hello. She was considered guilty. It was as if she had brought the wolf into the house by herself. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when she heard children's voices on the street. Laughter, bickering, playing with the ball. And suddenly, for a moment, it seemed to her that one of the voices was Joby or Jason. And then her whole world crumbled like a paper boat in flames. She knew that the truth was not something that the court would confirm. The truth is something that burns from the inside, every day, over and over again. And she will stay with you until your last breath. The Texas sun beat through the curtains, highlighting the dust particles like tiny ghosts of the past that lived in this house, in these walls, in this air. Claire Bradburn stood by the window, holding a cup of already cold coffee in her hand, and looked out at the garden where her boys used to run. Jason and Joby, an 8-year-old and a 9-year-old. 2 whirlwinds of light and life that disappeared in the black smoke of one August night, which she would never forget, no matter how many years passed. Almost 40 years have passed since then. When they first moved into this house on the outskirts of Waco, Texas, everything seemed like a new beginning. Ed was quiet, collected, even caring at first. He hadn't been a father to the boys since birth, but according to the documents, he had become one, and Claire hoped that love could be raised. She was mistaken. He did not raise his hand, did not shout, did not drink, did not humiliate directly. His brutality was quieter. He locked the children in the garage if they behaved badly. He punished them with silence. One day she returned home, and Joby was standing barefoot in the rain in the backyard because he deserved to think about his actions. Then Claire screamed for the first and last time, and then it was August 1986. The heat, as always in Texas, was sticky and heavy, shrouding everything in a pall. That day, Claire went to work, and the boys stayed at home with Ed. It was a common occurrence, but not that day, not on that hot, doomed Saturday. Sometime in the late afternoon, she got a call. Fire. A garden hut. The children are inside. Everything burned down. The bodies have been found, without the possibility of identifying the persons. The police initially treated the case as an accident. Garages are on fire. Summer, heat. Children could play with a lighter. But Claire knew that Jason was afraid of fire. Joby was careful to the point of boredom. Something was wrong. As the investigation went deeper, oddities surfaced. Ed was insured for children. The policies were issued recently. He wasn't trying to save them. He didn't call for help. He stood and watched, according to the neighbors. He went for a run when it was burning. He was acting strangely, too calm. At the 1988 trial, the prosecutor, as if putting the corpses on the shelves, lined up the prosecution. Claire testified. The firefighters talked about how the door of the hut was locked from the outside. The court sentenced Ed to life in prison. She felt not relief, but emptiness. It's too late. No amount of time will bring her sons back. The years have passed. Science has stepped forward. Arson, the causes of the fires. Everything was changing. It turned out that many of the techniques used in the 80s were wrong. Junk science, as the experts called it. The Innocence Project took up the Ed Graff case. In 2014, the verdict was overturned. The trial has been rescheduled. Claire went back to the courtroom. She wasn't crying anymore. She stopped crying back in 1986. But she was talking. She told how she found the boys in fear after Ed's educational conversations, how he avoided their embrace, how he signed the insurance, and then something happened that no one expected. At the new trial, Ed, who had insisted on his innocence for almost 30 years, suddenly said, "I'm guilty." He admitted that he killed them. He said this while standing in the courtroom, looking at those who were still left of the family he had destroyed. He admitted, but did not explain. Why? For what? How I slept at night. It didn't happen. Just a confession. Just an empty voice. It would seem that justice has prevailed. He was sentenced again. 2 terms of 30 years each. But in Texas, the laws were written a long time ago, and there are loopholes in them. If the time and behavior give the right amount, freedom. 8 days after his confession, he was released. Claire didn't find out about it right away. She lived alone, worked in the library, and wrote letters to the boys every August. When the department called her, the voice on the other end was as dry as a report. "Ms. Bradburn, we must notify." From that day on, she no longer opened the windows. She doesn't need the sun anymore. She was writing a diary. I wrote to the boys. Long letters, 10 to 20 pages each. She remembered how Joby laughed when he managed to tie his shoelaces, and how Jason secretly fed a street cat, hiding food in his backpack. She remembered how their hair smelled after sleeping. It was all alive in her, only in her. Not everyone in the city knew the truth. Many have forgotten. Those who remembered spoke in whispers. He's out. He's staying with a relative now. He goes to the store by himself. And just once, someone knocked on Claire's door. It was a boy, about 6 years old, with curly hair and eyes just like Jason's. He asked, "Are you Mrs. Bradburn? My grandmother said that you knew my uncle." His grandmother was Ed's sister. He brought with him the legacy of the one who took her everything. And there was innocence in him. There were her grandchildren in it who won't be there. She closed the door. She sat down, and she was crying. So the years went by. Ed lived in freedom. Sometimes he was seen in the supermarket, sometimes in church. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He did not perform. He wasn't hiding, but he wasn't explaining himself either. People passed by, hiding their eyes. There was no remorse in him. There was only silence in it. And then the disease came. He became ill in 2021. Cancer, the doctors said. Slowly, cruelly. He was hospitalized. He has spent the last months surrounded by medical devices. And one night, under the rustle of IVs and the light of a lamp, he called a nurse. "Get Claire," he said. She refused. And she didn't come back. He died alone. As he lived, he left a note. There was no apology in it, just a list. Names, age, fire, ash, silence. Not a single word of pain. Claire didn't go to the funeral. She planted 2 trees, one maple and one acacia tree, in the place where the hut once stood. And every evening she came there with 2 cups of cocoa. One is for Joby. The second one is for Jason. She sang to them, in a whisper, in a voice that couldn't scream anymore. And in that whisper, among the leaves, where no one built sheds anymore, where no one locked the doors anymore, her boys lived forever. The hot Texas air on that August day in 1986 was still, as if the air itself knew something terrible was coming. In the suburbs of Waco, where the greenery of the trees seemed scorched by the sun and the dust hung in the air like a thick veil, nothing foreshadowed tragedy, at least if viewed from the outside. The small house of the Graff family stood among others like it, with a sagging fence, an old barn in the yard, and 2 noisy boys, Jason and Joby, who spent the summer hopping around barefoot, collecting tadpoles, dragging dogs by the tail, and building forts out of cardboard. But their mother, Claire Bradburn, had long felt that something was wrong. At night, she lay staring at the ceiling, listening to her husband, Ed Graff, breathing. He never screamed or hit her, but the silence he radiated was frightening. It was the silence of calculation, of inner coldness, as if a black hole lived inside him. The boys became afraid to be alone with him, and even though Jason was a year younger than Joby, it was he who once said in a whisper, trembling, "He looks like he wants us to disappear." Claire brushed it off, thinking it was just a child's fear. But then there was that night when Joby woke up crying, hid under the bed, and didn't want to get out. "He wanted to lock me in the barn," he sobbed. And then the day came when neither Jason nor Joby died. The barn in the yard flared up like a match. At first it was smoke, then flame. Fast, hungry. The neighbors ran outside, and Ed, as eyewitnesses would later say, stood at a safe distance and watched. He looked as if he had been waiting for this. I watched until the lives of 2 boys ended in a shed littered with gasoline, tires, boxes, and rags. The investigation went quickly. Firefighters were talking about signs of arson. The witnesses are talking about Ed's strange behavior. Claire is about the fear of boys. But all this was secondary. The main thing is that the fire that consumed the barn was not accidental. Ed denied it. He said he went out to get groceries. He said he left the kids for a minute. He said a lot of things, but the words couldn't hide his eyes. Empty, without remorse. In 1988, a jury found him guilty. 2 death sentences. At the time, Claire thought justice had been served. But the years passed, and behind the barbed wire, Ed was waiting. He waited until science undermined his verdict. New experts have appeared. There were doubts about the arson theory. There were defenders who called the fire an accident. The Innocence Project appeared, and suddenly the case was reviewed. The court recognized the mistakes. The evidence was recognized as pseudoscience. And 2014 brought Claire not hope, but fear. Ed was being released. Or at least they gave it a chance. But then something happened that no one expected. Against the background of the confused jury, in a hall saturated with silence, Ed stood up. His voice was cold, as if he was reading out a menu. I'm guilty. 30 years of lies collapsed in 1 second. He killed Jason and Joby. He knew what he was doing, and he repented. Not because he had repented, but because he knew that now he was entitled to leniency. He received 2 sentences of 30 years each. But according to the laws of Texas, he was eligible for early release. He was released 8 days later. It was the second fire in Claire's life. The first one took her children. The second is her belief in justice.